Welcome everyone to our last meeting. I hope you guys all join us next year. So we'll probably start meeting back in February at some point, maybe like mid-February. But just remember, over the next couple months, we have Slack. So if you have stuff you want feedback on, or if you want to just like ask questions about like what computers to buy and all that kind of stuff, it's a great place to get some instant feedback. So there's some conversations in there happening about, Jacob was asking about what kind of monitor to get, and other people were asking for feedback. So holidays are coming up. You're all getting gifts, hopefully. So maybe it's a good place to ask for specs for stuff before you get it, or even reading materials, things like that. So today we have two of our original founding members who came back from the real world to give us their tips for Blender, and doing different kinds of things in it. Either for motion graphics or like fully CG types of animations, or for live action compositing. So it's a really good tool to get started on, to like understand what 3D space is before moving on to something that's a little more heftier and industry standard. So I will pass it to Mike and Eric to lead us.
Thanks, Shayna. So I guess I'll just start off with an introduction of why I am here. Eric will do it on his own. I don't need to speak for him. My name's Mike, and I graduated with a degree in television radio from Ithaca in December of 2017. So Cortica was essentially my 5-year reunion. For any of you Ithaca people, hope you had a good Cortica. And for you Syracuse people, just let us have this, okay? Please. You get to be a big sports school every day. I personally started using Blender seriously in Ed Schneider's class junior year, if anyone has taken classes with Ed. And since then, it's become a bit of a hobby for me. Definitely not the most artistic person I know, but I really love the technical stuff, especially 3D workflows and rendering. I basically get great satisfaction when a long render finishes. Blender especially has given me tools to experiment with 3D stuff that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise, since I don't use anything professionally, or any 3D things professionally. I do use some things professionally. And that being said, I'm currently a segment producer at MLB Network, and I'm mainly in charge of the training and maintaining our workflows. So that just means I really enjoy showing people new things. And so even if you're able to glean one thing from me and Eric tonight, I'll count that as a win. I've used Blender at my job, and even though 3D is in no way, shape, or form a requisite for sports television, it doesn't hurt, and you get to be the resident wizard that people like Eric, Sam, and Avery, who is complaining about working a 70-hour week, just to name a few, wizards like them that at their jobs. So Eric and I are going to do our best to showcase how we use Blender in our semi-professional environments and why you might want to as well. So Eric, all you.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Eric. I am also a graduate of Ithaca College class of 2017, currently working as a VFX editor at Fuse FX, which I've been doing for 4 years now. And in terms of Blender, I'm still relatively a noob, so to say, when it comes to 3D, but Blender is definitely a tool that helps me, grow more foundationally, at least in CG for sure, because it's free and, very powerful, even for, not being the most professionally sought after tool. Although I can't really say that anymore because a lot of pros actually are turning to it for certain things. But I'm just using it not for work, but just for personal growth. Because my main goal ultimately is to keep growing in VFX, but more on the 2D compositing side, but having that knowledge in CG, and especially when you get to compositing CG, it's helpful to have those core components that and making your own elements in 3D and then knowing how to comp them in the end is a vital tool that will go a long way. So the thing I'll be presenting tonight is, a more personal experiment I did at home to kind of build a personal VFX pipeline. So it won't just be Blender, it'll be other tools that I used alongside Blender, but Blender was a very key component to getting that done. And as Mike was saying, the more you can learn just the foundation, then Blender is very much capable, professional or just starting out for sure. So that's where I'm at. So I guess I'm the one sharing the presentation.
Oh,
correct?
yeah.
All right, give me 1 second. And fire her up. All right, so everyone can see the screen.
I've got it. Cool. So yeah, Blender donuts are a big thing with us, and you'll figure out why towards the end. But all right, Eric, you want to kick me on to the next slide?
Yep.
Great. All right, now it's time for everybody to hate me. Pop quiz. Can anyone guess what year the first Blender was patented? Yeah, great guess. 1922 was the first drink mixer, while the first commercial blender was released in 1937 with the Vitamix. The name Blender for the 3D software came from the Swiss electronic band Yellow, who released a song called Blender in 91. None of this is important, but I'm a trivia nut and I'm the one with the unmuted microphone, so you all have to deal with me. All right,
Next.
yeah, please. All right, Blender is a free and open source 3D computer graphics software tool set used for creating animated films, visual effects, art, 3D printed models, motion graphics, interactive 3D applications, virtual reality, and formerly video games. Also, it's free. I'd like to thank 2 people for getting this program in front of me, and that's James Furr in my 10th grade business class when he showed me how to extrude text, and Professor Ed Schneider at Ithaca. He teaches a class called Experience Design that focused heavily on Expo product experience. But for the most part, though, I'm self-taught in Blender. The internet is a great place with absolutely no downsides whatsoever. And we have a slide at the end with some resources you can use to learn more if you want. I'm not your dad. Oh, Eric went faster than me in my speaker notes. All right, so I'm probably the biggest Blender fanboy you'll ever meet. And if you meet someone bigger, please give them my email. I'm serious. I love Blender because it has so much bang for your buck. I mean, just look at these 4 renders here. Like, these are all Blender renders. I double checked to make sure they weren't photos. Also, like I said, bang for your buck. Here are some of the reasons why. 1, it's free. 2, it's free. It's free. Did I mention it was free? Just kidding. There's some paid options, and no, it's a double kit. It's actually free. It's just all free. Yeah, so that's the setup. If you haven't been sold yet on why it's free, you can pay for support though. You probably can if you're in a big pipeline. I am not in a big pipeline, therefore I've never spent a dime.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the ultimate questions that a lot of people ask is like, you hear about Maya, which is, the industry standard of CG and VFX and gaming and architect and whatnot. So you might think, or a lot of people ask, will Blender replace Maya? And short term, no. And probably not ever really. Because Maya is too established in the industry right now to, be viable to just kick it out, because that will be very expensive to change your whole pipeline around it. Not in terms of software of Blender, but just R&D and all the tools that studios set up. So, Maya's been around for years. It's been well established. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that's why Blender is not going to replace Maya, but it very much can be added in addition to, or if it's a new company starting out, it's a very viable option to go with. Because Blender, like, I've seen so many examples of Blender being used professionally in the film and television industry. Like, all these movies and shows have used Blender in some capacity. Example, Warcraft. I remember the VFX soup actually used it for a creature just to add like a very quick little detail in a shot. Man, the High Castle, one of the studios, their entire pipeline was built off of Blender. Next Gen is also an animated film completely done in Blender. Same, and then Moonfall, Morning Show, Big Little Lies, it's another studio all using Blender. And then, yeah, so very, very viable option for pros. Maybe not for a fully established pipeline at ILM right now, but can be used as a side program for certain specific things. Very much dependent on your needs.
Yeah, so kind of like how Eric was just saying, like it's totally dependent on your needs. And that's the nice thing about Blender is there's so many different ways that you can attack problems in it. One of the ways that I attack problems in Blender, because I'm a fraud, is something called kit bashing, which is, I did not know that that Avatar Studios at Nickelodeon of Avatar: The Last Airbender is using Blender right now. That is super interesting. Yeah, so I do something called kit bashing, which is just basically taking different elements and smashing them together, like this puzzle here. Yeah, okay, Brad, I appreciate it. It's when you take two things that seem like they can fit and fit them together. I suck at modeling in Blender. I'm probably the worst person to model in Blender, but I'm really, really good, like top 10 best at downloading free public domain and CC0 models from BlendSwap and Polyhaven. Most of the work I'm about to show you has been kit bashed from a bunch of different sources. The magic happens when you start to be able to figure out how you can use part of A and part of B to create a new C. Yeah, so these are some stills, some viewport screenshots I took of the most recent piece that I used in Blender, or used Blender on at work, which was images of the regular season from 2021 for baseball. I went a little overboard and probably could have gotten away with way less, but I wanted to push what I could handle in Blender. Absolutely pushed it in this one. And I think you all will have access to the slideshow afterwards. So if you want to watch the finished piece, that images of the regular season 2021, there's a link. We're not going to watch it now. It's like 4 minutes. I've seen it 10,000 times. And then on the next slide are some more screenshots. The two on the left are from a New Faces, New Places piece that we make every opening day to highlight the players who are traded or signed with new teams in the offseason. The piece on the right was the All-Star Game red carpet ceremony, both of which were made in 2020. So we didn't have very much footage of these guys to work with because of COVID. That's why I decided to make some shots in Blender to help fill the time. Again, links to watch these are in the slide. The New Faces, New Places tease up on the left there, I created a desk with some knickknacks on it and just flew a camera over it. You can see how minimal that one is. This is what I mean when I say I'm a kit basher. I grabbed a few models from BlendSwap, threw them together in a scene to make it look coherent. Grabbed the flash drive, a mug, pen, a couple pens. The only thing that I modeled in that scene was the MLB Network paperweight on the corner there. But then I did go overboard with the full model of New York City right below it. I wanted to fly a camera over the desk and into a map to really emphasize the new places part. I probably could have gone away without using a full city model, but again, I was trying a new technique for that, using like Google Open Maps. And then the red carpet tees, this one was super simple. I found a couple models on BlendSwap of a tea light wall and some hedges and slapped them on a red carpet, which is just a super simple hair simulation with some lovely velvet stanchions that I actually modeled myself back in college for Ed's class. You can grab them off BlendSwap if you want. They're public domain. Again, more links. I've not used Blender on any of, wait. Yeah, no. Oh, the slides are backwards. Nice, Eric.
What?
You can skip through. So those the links for these 3 pieces were throughout the slides. So if you watch them later, and if you have any questions and or if you have any questions about the process, or you just want to tell me how good I am, my Slack and email are wide open.
All right.
Oh, the next one is me as well. Oh, great. So for pretty much all of those projects, especially the one with the stadium, the images of the regular season, the way that I handled that was I exported some EXRs from Blender with multiple passes attached. Most notably, I exported an RGB pass, a depth mat, a crypto mat, and a 3D camera. I remember when I was exporting that, a death mat, it took a long time to render. I remember when I was dealing with this, I was reaching out to Shane and I was like, hey, I have to use a crypto mat. And you were like, a what? So After Effects actually handles these EXRs really well. And since this was my first time doing anything like this, it was actually pretty intuitive. I was able to choose which layers from the passes I wanted to pull from, either in the extractor effect, camera lens blur, or the cryptomat effect. Cryptomats were super cool and still are super cool. Yeah, I didn't know that Nuke had them. They're super cool because they give every shape or object its own color. So I'm able to select which object I want to use as a mat. So in this case, I wanted to use the screen face as the mat. And with the 3D camera, all I had to do was enable 3D on my screen replacement, and voila, I had a monitor comp that I could swap out later quickly. I did know that part, that it was third party. So I had a monitor comp I could swap out later and quickly, which in sports television is the name of the game. The depth mat also gave a bit more realism to the shot, even though it wasn't a terribly real shot to begin with. You can see the lights in the city really being affected by this in the bottom image there. So yeah, cryptomats, I was the last one to figure out about those, but super cool, and I will probably use them in the future. Arnold still has some restrictions exporting them from Maya. Yeah, that would make sense.
Yep. Hey, well,
I think is
All
my
you,
turn.
baby.
Now it's my turn. So Mike gave his side of using Blender for his job. I am doing my part now in showing you how I made this shot. A nice CG statue on a table in a shot with parallax. And the entire methodology that I used to basically put the shot together is based on a pipeline that is based on these 3 videos more specifically. These guys are really awesome resources on YouTube, particularly Alfie Vaughn. He's actually a compositor, formerly worked at the mill. He just moved to a new job recently, but he worked at the mill for 5 years. So he has lots of pro knowledge that he's brought to his YouTube channel and how to integrate it with Blender and Nuke. So yeah, these are definitely good resources, and everything that I learned relating to Blender and how to do this entire pipeline is based on these. So I will skip ahead because we don't want to watch the entire 10 to 20 minutes of these videos. So as Ian Huber would say, let's make some CGI with free open source software, Blender. Okay. So before I start anything in Blender, the first thing I had to do was prep my plate. So I shot it on my Panasonic GH5 and shot that in Vlog, which you're not seeing now. I actually converted this plate to ACES, which stands for Academy Color Encoding System. And this was one of the things that I learned through Alfie's video is an ACES VFX workflow. So I started by taking my plate into Resolve, which I convert into ACES and export as an EXR, which the specs down here specifically are RGB half zip compression, and just make sure it's in the right color space, which ACES is basically just the Academy's big color system that gives you way more range than sRGB 709 or to some degree the human eye can see. Sam, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. You can speak more to that since you are working in color daily. But so I render that out. Before I go into Blender, I also made a JPEG version of the of that image sequence, because 3D programs will be a little weird with EXR sometimes. So just rendering as a JPEG with the correct color, totally doable. And before I went into Blender, I tracked in a program called Syntheyes, which you can do 3D tracking in Blender, as you can see on the image on the right over here. It is very viable, but Syntheyes is one of those tools that once you learn to use it or start to use it, it's hard to imagine not using it more regularly, because it's a very powerful tool. And compared to other 3D tracking softwares, it's actually pretty affordable. There's an intro version for $300 and the pro version for $500. And it's become one of the standards actually in the industry. The most standard 3D tracking software is 3D Equalizer, but that's very unattainable because it's like thousands of dollars. Same thing with PF Track. Syntheyes is one of the top 3 for 3D camera tracking for sure. You can also track in, After Effects or Nuke. They have 3D cameras as well, but I really wanted to track in Syntheyes and give this program a go. And I was very glad I did, because the results were quite good, actually.
Do you know how much the license is for Syntheyes these days, Eric?
For Syntheyes, it's like $500 I paid for the entire thing for the pro version.
Yeah.
So it's very attainable even when you go to the high end of Syntheyes. Because I know
they're still not doing subscription. It's just a one-time purchase.
I believe so. I just purchased it one time.
Cool.
Yeah, and this is a program that we actually use at work. Our 3D tracker mostly uses Syntheyes for the most part.
Nice.
So once you, before I jump ahead of myself. So once it's tracked, you got a good 3D camera track. This gets exported as an Alembic file or a .abc file. And that's basically a file containing a 3D scene. So it will hold the camera, it will hold any object you put in there as reference, and then just everything that you set in Syntheyes, it'll import directly into Blender, be all set up, and should be all good. So then we get into the actual Blender fun, which like Mike, I am not a 3D modeler myself either. That's something that would be fun to get into one day, but I am not a pro at 3D modeling either. So the statue that you see is just a free download from polyhaven.com. I just wanted to choose something that looked really good and could possibly play in the real world for this scenario. Just something experimental. So I grabbed this nice statue, imported that into Blender, and then, I have my scene set up from Syntheyes. I put a plane in here to act as the tables as a shadow catcher so that I can catch the actual shadows from the object that it would create in the real world, as well as reflections. And then for lighting, actually, I have a 360 camera, and I use that to make an HDRI, or just a giant 360 camera in my room, which then influences the real light from that shot. And one other thing that I have to keep in mind with this is that, as we talked about before, I'm doing this in an ACES pipeline, which Blender by default doesn't have an option for ACES. You actually have to download that from a link that's in Alfie's video. It's a GitHub link, I believe. And you just download that. You put it in your color management folder in Blender, and then you have access to ACES. So you have that. And then once you get it all set up, it's tracking nicely, you can render this out, which some people get nervous about the idea of like 3D renders, like taking up so many resources and just taking a long time in general. On laptops, depending on your specs, it might take some time, but some things that, some pro tips that I've learned is that I'd say the biggest thing is that you can actually render at half resolution. So say it's a 4K shot, render it at 1080 and it will go twice as fast compared to doing it in UHD. Because then you can just scale it up. Because generally you're going to be softening your CG to fit your shot better anyway. So if it's not like super sharp, that's fine because the world's not that sharp compared to, or your camera's not that sharp compared to a 3D program. So that would definitely help. In my case, I also have 2 graphics cards in my system. So 2 3080s got this 2-second clip to render in 35 minutes. So a good GPU will help, but that half resolution thing will definitely also, help you in the long run.
So Eric, while you're on that slide real quick, that HDR eye that you created, do you want to quickly touch on that and how you'd put that together?
Sure. Let me actually grab the camera, which I have on my shelf here. I'll turn my camera.
Oh, we're ad-libbing.
He got
Throw you
me.
for a loop.
So yeah, this 360 camera right here, the Insta360 So I just took a series of images, literally this on its little selfie stick tripod.
Yeah.
Put it in the center of my room, and then using an app on my phone, the Insta360 app. Usually you want to get as much dynamic range that you can from your HDR, which HDRI stands for high dynamic range image. So that speaks for itself. So I just had this prop there. I took a few different exposures, one at its brightest point, one at a well-exposed point, and then low, and then a couple in between, just getting as much range. And then those get compiled together. I believe you can do it in Photoshop, but I used Affinity Photo because that's my photo editing software choice these days. Because $50 for Photoshop effectively. And then, yeah, it gets merged into a .hdr file, which then can be brought into Blender in your world settings. And then that will help calculate real world lighting for that particular scene, as long as you just rotate it correctly. So just make sure like the window behind me had to be lined up because that's going to dictate the brightness of the sun. So that's what the HDRI covers.
Eric, my favorite part of that is that you could have taken the picture, or you did take the picture on an app on your phone, yet you still choose to be in the same room as the HDRI. I love it. Little Easter egg.
Yes. Why not be in my own shot?
Where do we get our texture packs from, Eric? Texture packs. Polygon has some good free ones, like Andrew Price's. That's pretty good.
Yeah. The place that I got this model, actually, Polyhaven, that has an encompassing amount of different things. So free 3D models, it has free HDRIs, it has free textures. Not a huge library compared to like Megascans or Polygon, but some good free options depending on your needs.
Yeah, and if you really want to get like crazy with it, like I've been in my spare downtime lately, I've been trying to get like procedural materials and textures where you just build it yourself. So yeah, I don't recommend that, but you could.
Nerding out on nodes. Yeah.
All right. So once everything's done in Blender, it's rendered, which I rendered as an EXR just because I need to keep consistency. And EXR, I think, is more or less the standard of VFX renders, just because it holds a lot more data. It's a little bit easier than DPX these days, especially for the amount of color data that you need to hold on to. So I render those, and then I comp it in Nuke, not Blender, I noted, because backtracking a little bit, all the points that we've talked about in terms of conform and editing, tracking, obviously doing the 3D work, and even compositing, they can all be done in Blender, but they're not very strong at it compared to other programs. Like, it's not a dedicated tracker, it's not a dedicated compositor. The tracking, I think, is viable enough. Compositing, not the biggest fan of it from the videos I saw. But either way, I have access to Nuke Indie, and Nuke is the industry standard for VFX compositing. So since I want to be doing that in the long run, figure it'd be a better idea to comp in Nuke or Fusion because it has node compositing. I can't go back to After Effects now that I'm so deep into node compositing, but not After Effects, Nuke or Fusion are definitely good tools for this. Nuke in particular is a little bit better when it comes to 3D compositing, but you can do most of the same stuff in Fusion. So this node tree indicates that up here's the plate. And then I had to do some painting because if you saw in the original plate, there are some pieces of tape with tracking markers on them. And that was just so I had good tracking reference for the 3D parallax to put the object in. But even though the statue actually covers some of it, doesn't cover all of it. And I had to do some tedious paint work to get that to disappear and look correctly with all the reflections. And then down here is all the CG work. So statues right here, which when you export out of Blender, EXR is also good because you can render different channels for different purposes in here. So as you can see down here, I have a contact sheet, a layer contact sheet, which basically just puts a grid of all the render passes that are contained within your 3D file, so that you can see, okay, it's just the statue, it's just the shadow. They can also do passes for the lighting specifically. They can also do normals, different textures. And these are very beneficial in the long run because depending on your needs, say you have a client that has a note, if it's a very specific note, say about lighting or color, you can actually go into that EXR, isolate the lighting itself, change it, and then re-render it. And you can do that all within Nuke, within those EXRs, as opposed to having to go back and re-render in Blender, which can be a pain in the butt, especially if you get too many notes back and you have to wait much longer to render in there as opposed to just hitting a couple buttons in Nuke. So that's the main goal that I was doing with this entire experiment was CG compositing, so I can, learn to or practice doing this kind of compositing. And one great resource actually when it comes to this stuff is Josh Parks at Compositing Pro, who is a well-seasoned, I want to say 10-year experienced VFX compositor and compositing supervisor now. He's worked on things like, I think Solo, a Star Wars story. He's worked on Wonder Woman. I think he worked on the last Transformers movie. But he has a resource, which I linked to at the end of this presentation, about all things Nuke compositing. And he's very good at teaching you the ins and outs of Nuke. And he has one course dedicated to CG compositing where I learned a lot of the tricks that relate to these compositing techniques for CG objects and EXRs. So I would highly recommend looking at that. It is paid, but it's actually pretty affordable, all things considered. I think that class in particular is barely $100. But yeah, definitely we'll look into that. And this was just some finishing stuff that I did, and then output of that, and I had my render. And then I would bring that back into Resolve, make sure that everything was lining up, color was looking okay. I would put that in sRGB because straight aces will look really crunchy and bad. sRGB is what most computer monitors are for the most part. So keeping in that final color gamma will be very beneficial to getting the right final image. And once you do all that, this is the result you get.
All that for 2 seconds, Eric. That's how complicated this stuff is.
Yeah, man.
And-
That's what the pros do all the time.
Yeah.
Anywhere from 9 frames to like 10,000 frames.
It's a game of
Luke would
inches.
know.
Yeah, it is a game of inches. And like I said earlier, like the people who do this kind of stuff for real, like how Eric did a way more serious pipeline than I did. I just brought things into After Effects because I'm a scrub. But the people who do the stuff are wizards. And also a lot of people ask what kind of machine you need to run Blender. Obviously, the better the computer, the better the performance. So I recommend 2 3080 Ti's. No, I mean, this is like the meme says here. It works on a potato or a toaster. It'll run on pretty much anything, but like any 3D software or any software you expect to get results like Eric was showing out of this, it can be intensive. If you have patience, it can work on pretty much any machine. In high school, I used to set up my laptop on like ice packs, literally sitting on top of ice packs, and I would swap the ice packs out. In the recommended specs here from Blender's site, honestly, those are like for it to work best, but the only one there that I will really say you really should get is the 3-button mouse. That's really the best one. Also, you can get around render times if they have laptop. Yeah, my roommate freshman year had that. It was kind of wonky. Yeah, you gotta use the 3-button mouse. But you can get around some render times if you have the money or patience with online render farms like Pixel Plow, which I put a link up to in the next slide. Which the next slide has all of our resources, kind of like works cited, more or less. So here's plenty of things that you could use to further your education on Blender or these workflows if you want to. Also, fun fact for anybody who didn't know, Blender's on Steam. It's very highly reviewed. Shocking that person there, 14,000 hours in it, says that you can blend it, or Blender is really good. It's just not dishwasher safe. So hopefully y'all were able to glean something from me and Eric droning on about stuff, more me droning than Eric, because Eric's stuff was actually super cool. But yeah, I have nothing else. I'm cool to open the floor to questions unless Eric has something else to add.
Nope. Pretty much any of the stuff here, definitely check it out if you want to learn more about Blender for basic things or even pro things, because there's a couple of professionals in the VFX industry that give really good presentations on how they use Blender in their professional life. But that's it for me. I don't have anything else to add.
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing and we'll open up the floor.
I want to dig into those links right away. So where do we get that slide deck, yo?
That's a good question. I don't know. Shayna has it.
Yeah.
They're gonna
Shayna
put it on
has that.
Slack.
Okay, cool.
Oh, cool.
Thank you.
Or
Thanks,
I will.
Shayna. Yeah, anyone have any questions or concerns or anything about it?
I was just mentioning in chat though, like I'm getting really sick of Maya and have been waiting to jump into Blender, and now with the stuff I'm seeing, especially coming from my students too, where I'm like, God damn, what? And being able to do it on a reasonable machine too, it's pushing me over the edge. So yeah, I'm gonna be jumping into that starting on Thanksgiving, definitely over break.
Nice. Have fun with it. Yeah, you get to make your own donut.
Oh yeah, doing the donut for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ironically, I started the donut project, but I never finished it. The thing that I found more helpful for me, like which tutorial series for beginners, was actually the Apple project.
Oh yeah.
That one was
Wow.
really good.
That's blasphemous. You gotta like the donut. There's the donut, the anvil.
I didn't say I didn't like the donut. I just said I
Okay.
never finished it.
Something we didn't even talk about, which I didn't really make a note about it either, is Blender now in like 3.1 has geometry nodes which I'm
cool.
not going to say it's giving Houdini a run for its money, but oh boy, like if you ever want to get into Houdini, like Geometry Node's kind of not a horrible place to start out.
Yep.
Mhm.
Maybe, I don't know. I've tried
Yeah.
Houdini one time.
Yes, yeah, it's a learning curve. But procedural animation, procedural assets like that, yeah, Blender is really starting to flex in that department. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's from my point of view, it seems like the things that are really starting to take over CG, like Maya is still obviously prevalent. Like, you know, you can't get around that, especially for those who are spending millions of dollars on their pipelines. You know, you can't break them without knowing, you know, the outcome in the end. But you know, in terms of like, especially new places or like places that are willing to take the risk, Blender and Houdini in particular are very much standardized tools. Because like, I think even certain houses that I know, they've pretty much abandoned Maya and they're doing most of their work in Houdini. I mean, some of the animation is still done in Maya, but in terms of finishing CG, it's all done in Houdini.
Yeah, character stuff, that's the one area where Maya is still going to stay around for a long time, is character animation, dealing with mocap, character setup, that kind of stuff. But yeah, as far as like finished render work, procedural animation, effects, it's getting left behind, and it's starting to show its seams, certainly.
Yeah, one of the studios actually that I know was famous for their Blender pipeline was Barnstorm VFX, and I saw an artist tweet on Twitter that they were ecstatic to work on Thor: Love and Thunder, which they did layout work in Blender at their studio. And I know they're also very big on Houdini now. They do a lot more Houdini than Blender, but they still use Blender quite a bit for at least layout. And then I think most of their finishing is done in Houdini. So it definitely seems to be the way to go.
No one has any questions?
Oh, Jacob, you have some questions.
Hey guys. So I have a question, but to be honest, it's like it's about your ACEs workflow. How did you do that? Like, how did you? Does that like do you have to like orient your computer for Blender, like orient for ACEs in Blender, and then your computer separately, or is it all like one big? How does that work?
So so with Blender, ACES does not come by default. Standard Blender is just default sRGB. You have to download a package from GitHub, which let me go find the link to what that video was talking about in Alfie's video. And I'll put it in the chat.
Incentive maybe to not do Maya's. This is like necessary now in Maya to have like a proper workflow, or it's like it's not like necessary. It's like comes like as default that like thinks you're going to be using ACEs, and it like if you don't know like what that is, it can be just like confusing from the second you open the application.
Blender. Okay, it was not in the description. Where did I get it from? Where did I get that link?
Eric, I also just want to say that your camera, like your webcam, looks so good.
Right?
You look great.
Panasonic, man, that's my go-to.
You look great.
Thank
What are
you.
you doing with that webcam?
What am I doing with it?
Why is it
just looking
webcam?
pretty. Maybe start a VFX OnlyFans.
Yeah, private lessons, man.
Shout out to my Patreon. Let's see. All right. I'm going to do some digging to find where this link went, but I will get back to you on that. But long story short is that it's a GitHub link that you have to go into your program files, like when you install Blender, like where all your software installations are. And there's a color management folder. And you basically have to take that stuff out and put the ACES files that you download in. And then that will pretty much set everything up. The video that's in the presentation from Alfie Vaughn is his name, the compositor that formerly worked at the mill. He will kind of walk you through how to set that up. And there's some other videos that relate to that
Did,
will also get
did
you
you
that setup.
do something on your computer though, like you like with the GitHub thing? Is that partly for your computer too, or is it just in the
No,
application?
it's just it's literally a download link with files. You put the files in your color management folder, and that's it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the difference, because Maya's implemented as standard, is like render display and stuff like will look like different than like the actual rendered result depending on the display settings, and it's
Mhm.
just translating that to sRGB, and it looks weird when you're seeing it in Maya. Yeah, I'm running into the same thing. And so just a question for color folks. Open like ACE's color transforms can be applied to like a open CIO, open color IO workspace. Like they're not mutually exclusive. It's
Sam would probably be more
yeah,
knowledgeable of those specifics.
that's what I was hoping would respond.
So Sam, if you're there,
Oh, color management is yeah.
I've actually not used that OpenColor, that OCIO thing before. So I'm actually not. What's the original question? Sorry.
Just that ACES versus open color IO. The way I like understand it is that ACES like color transforms can be applied into open color IO. I don't think they're like mutually exclusive. And it is.
oh,
like,
you mean like converting
think-
it into another color space, basically.
yeah, because I see them. I see them listed together a lot, like ACES, OCIO, like together. And so I haven't dug into it enough to like really like understand the exactly, you know, what the change because like yeah, ACES, OCIO config. So it seems like it's ACES is being applied to a broader like color standard configuration, which is open color IO. And so I see a lot of 3D applications moving to that. But yeah, it's something I have to dig into certainly as well, to kind of figure out best practices and rendering this stuff out.
Yeah, in my head, I thought that they were kind of a similar thing, but one was like made by the academy,
Yeah.
quote unquote, and the other is this more open source thing.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure they're both essentially just scene referred color pipelines that you can
Mhm.
use on projects.
Yeah.
So I guess in theory it doesn't necessarily matter. It's kind of just whatever pipeline works for whatever project you're doing, whether that's up to you or whoever you're working with.
Mhm.
We've definitely used ACES more than OpenColor, but I have heard it mentioned from time to time. But I think it's kind of the same sort of concept where you're just sort of transforming things into the same sort of common working space, and then back out to whatever you're delivering to.
Yeah, I can actually speak a little bit related to work. Like we don't typically work in ACES on a lot of our shows, but we do get a lot of projects where the plates that are provided to us are already linearized EXRs.
Yeah.
But it was shot, say, on an Alexa camera in log. So when I bring in the EXRs, initially it's just going to look all crunchy, contrasty because it's linearized already. So I have to bring in OCIO plugin to go from linear to Alexa log so I can see it properly. And then
So you use that to do the actual transform.
yes, I don't like bake it in, but it's just for viewing purposes. So yeah, display. That's
Okay.
basically display referred.
Right. Interesting. So I didn't realize that it could be used for just that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Or at least that's how we have to use it because our software does not really read it correctly. But it also is like the reason you don't see it the same way in Nuke, for example, is because it's already default sRGB, so it just knows how to interpret it.
Right. Well, also, like, I know that, there's you can transform from one space to another, I guess, in a different sort of method. Like, I know that we use, for both Resolve and Baselight, you can either use the math that's built into those softwares, or, you can use a LUT to do the transform, and you'll get different results depending on which sort of checkboxes you hit to do that transform.
Yeah.
So I guess OpenColor does the same sort of thing. And ACES, there's different ways you can transform in and out of ACES as well. So that makes sense.
Yeah, which actually this conversation made me think of other Sam when we were reviewing his music video, I think last week. And it was making me think about Alfie's video and this conversation we're having right now, that one of the things that like at home or like, maybe for a student, one of the benefits of something like ACES or this entire color pipeline that we're discussing is that you can take, say, a log footage from whatever nice camera you're shooting for a project and some iPhone footage. And in Alfie's video, he's actually showing how you can convert that to ACES, have the iPhone come out as sRGB, and then another conversion for ACES to Panasonic gamma. And the way it interprets the color, it'll try to read it the exact same way so that it gets as close to a matched image as possible. Of course, you still have to tweak it because it's still different sources, but it helps it get a lot closer in terms of color balance.
Yeah, it helps to, make it so that each different piece of footage reacts in a similar way to whatever adjustments are being done to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it looks like Maxon's documentation for Redshift is defining OCIO as a color management system and ACES as a color workflow specifically, where ACES can be used within OpenColor IO, but OpenColor IO is not limited to ACES. Again, I have to get back into my Maya rendering and getting that stuff piped into Nuke to really get a handle on it, but fun stuff.
I'm always so humbled when I listen to you guys. I see a question in chat that I just want to answer because I know we're getting close to 9. Does kit bashing help you avoid UV unwrapping or make it easier, or is it the same as modeling from scratch? That's a great question. I have not UV unwrapped with a lot of these. A lot of things that I download come like previously textured and with materials on them, so I just bring them in and it just works. It just works on its own. I wouldn't say it's the same as modeling from scratch. It's basically like I skip the whole modeling stage and I just go right to the layout. So hopefully that answers your question.
And the term kit bashing is older than CG. Certainly, it comes from using model kits and bashing those little parts together. Like, so the ships on Star Wars, those are kit bashed. The Death Star, Star Destroyers, where they have all that little detail over it. It's literally from model kits of like World War II planes and tanks and stuff. They've broken apart and made into something that looks like big and sci-fi and complicated, but it's really just a bunch of disparate little model parts that are then painted and uniformed, made to look like something much more complex. And so the texturing part of this, I think, is a great argument for kit bashing and leveraging resources you can get online. Is that can be a huge time sink and is a huge learning curve when you're just starting out. And kit bashed assets often are nicely UV'd and textured, and you can just drop them in your project and roll, and then modify those textures and kind of get your feet wet in texturing and UVing with something that's already kind of semi-professionally put together.
Yeah, I've always found it easier to reverse engineer things. So I'll download something and just see how it works. And then the next time I need to do something, I kind of more or less know how it works.
It's a good way to learn.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Does anyone have any other questions? Otherwise, I'm cool finishing this up at 9. Wow, look at this, Shanna. We used the whole hour.
I know. Well, we
I have a
have
quick
one other
question.
thing to do. So if there's no other questions.
Jacob,
Hey, Jacob.
yes.
Hi. In Blender, like what are some things that are like advantageous, like as far as you might even get like a better result than another, like particle systems, like I've seen people do those, seems pretty simple. do you think that using Blender for that kind of thing would actually be like easier for the same kind of result or better as like Maya, which isn't necessarily built for particles as much as some other programs that are?
I mean, the other smarter people can step on me at any time here, but like the way that like I think about Blender these days lately has been kind of like, yeah, I could use the most expensive quality oil paint, but an artist can make something way better than I can with a #2 pencil. So like Blender has really good particle systems and like geometry nodes and simulations. But I think like a pro could handle it way better. Like you could do it in any program more or less. It's just how good you get at that program. Like I haven't run into any limitations with that stuff yet, but I'm not even scratching the surface of that stuff, if that makes sense. So you absolutely could do particle simulations in it, but I wouldn't say it's like the best at them or like, yeah, I mean, it's really just whichever you decide to use if you get really good at that. I hope that didn't come off as patronizing or if other people make that make sense.
I don't feel patronized.
Good,
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that, Jacob.
But yeah, no, particles are actually very viable in Blender. I know people that actually would prefer to do particles in Blender compared to other like third-party options. So
Yeah, I've heard a little bit of things like that. Seems like a lot of videos I see of cool simulations are either Blender or Houdini.
And the aforementioned donut tutorial will take you through basic particles too, to get distribution of the sprinkles and stuff like that. Another good point is the community around Blender is unparalleled for 3D apps. So as far as accessible knowledge, and where Maya, a lot of that stuff is hard to get to, the knowledge of how these things are done. With Blender, it's really open and out there, and so you can find 10 different people who are approaching the same creative problem that you are, and their solutions to it. So I think there's a lot of value in that, and in being able to kind of get into that space and make something cool based on what the community is kind of providing for knowledge. Where it's a lot more limited in Maya.
Mhm. I agree with that. Yeah, one of the links that we put in our resources page was r/Blender for that reason.
yeah,
Um,
I found
that's
that
great.
GitHub link for ACES for configuring for Blender. So
God, you
and there's a
hero.
and then blender.org and some information about ACES relating to ACES in general as well as for Blender specifically, I think.
Cool. Shayna, what's this new AE feature?
Eric, can you put those links on the slideshow somewhere?
Sure.
So I guess that's it. Another year is done.
Mm,
I don't know if we thanked Mike and Eric though. Thank you guys. That was great and quite informative.
no, thank all of you for putting up with us.
Yeah. Hopefully, we come off as mid-level at least.
Yeah,
And you don't mind questions, right, on Slack or otherwise?
Yeah,
absolutely
Tricky
not.
stuff? Cool.
No, yeah, please reach out.
absolutely.
I will. As I'm jumping into Blender, I'm gonna hit walls left and right, I'm sure.
Do it.
Any last words, Eric and Mike, for 6 years of Park Post?
Oh boy, it's been 6 years.
Oh, man.
No, I'm not giving like a eulogy like it's dying. Like it's just going to sleep for the winter. Like when we come out of hibernation, we'll be great. Then I'll talk about Mogerts in the spring because that's what I'm dealing with at work now. Anytime y'all have any questions or anything, that's the whole point of this. It started out as a big nerd fest, but now it's really grown into like a networking thing. So please utilize the network, lean on us. That's the whole point. We want to help.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
all started because we were passionate, and look where it's brought us. Half of you are learning to be pros, and some of you are pros with all the advice that has been presented from this group.
And then you give back.